The sun had barely risen above the horizon when Cedric and Vorganax, careful to avoid the main roads, quietly left the borders of Drakmoor. The path they had chosen was rough, winding through dense forests and hidden valleys, away from the prying eyes of the kingdom's patrols. Cedric rode in silence for the first few hours, still pondering their recent encounters and the new companion they had found in Elowen. The dragon, in his usual silent flight, stayed close but out of sight, hovering just above the trees. Cedric spoke through the medallion, his voice quiet but clear.
Vorganax, why didn't we stay with Elowen for a while? She seemed trustworthy enough.
The dragon's rumble echoed in his head.
I don't trust her. There's something about her, her unpredictability, her ability to draw attention to herself. We need to remain unnoticed for now, and she is drawing too much attention to herself.
The knight frowned.
But she fights for her village, for her people. You have seen the conditions they live in. It is not her fault that the king's taxes are ruining them. She returned the stolen gold to the villagers. They were starving. She is helping them.
Vorganax paused, growling from afar before answering.
Yes, she returned some of the gold, but she kept the rest for herself. That was clear. I do not approve of such methods.
Cedric sighed and shook his head.
She is simply doing her best to survive in a world that has forgotten her village. I have seen the way the people look at her. They respect her. She may be their only hope.
Perhaps.
The dragon admitted in a cautious tone.
Still, I find her current objectionable. Maybe with time I will alter my viewpoint. But when I observe dishonesty, I know it. She might look after the peasants, but her motivations are less pure than you might seem.
Cedric considered this as he continued riding along the road. He could not deny the attraction he felt for Elowen, the admiration he felt for her bravery. He did not press Vorganax, however. A dragon's instincts were usually sharp. As the midday sun began to beat down, the dragon swooped low, his shadow skimming the ground before landing next to Cedric. The dragon's massive form moved gracefully for such a large creature, his dark scales glimmering faintly in the dappled sunlight.
We're leaving Drakmoor.
Vorganax rumbled as he landed.
We should head to Zahira.
The knight glanced at the dragon as he stopped his horse.
Zahira? Why there? What might we find there?
He asked, frowning in confusion. Vorganax shifted his weight, his tail curling around his legs as he spoke.
There is an ancient city there, lost to many but not to me.
His voice was distant, as if evoking long-buried memories.
It is called Veloria. It was once the capital of the kingdom of Zahir, and home to countless dragons. Many of us lived in its caves and the surrounding mountains, deep in the heart of the city.
Cedric's eyes widened.
I have heard tales of the lost capital of Zahira, but Veloria? I did not know it was once home to dragons.
Vorganax nodded solemnly.
Yes, but when the war began, everything changed. Veloria was besieged for many years, and many battles were fought over it. Many died there. The knights of Zahira and the dragon riders who fought them did their best to defend it. But in the end, the city was nearly destroyed.
Cedric's gaze grew distant as he imagined the scale of such a battle.
What happened after the siege?
Those who survived either fled or hid.
Vorganax continued.
The caves that once housed the dragon families became tombs, and the city fell into disrepair. Veloria was a place of power, but also of great mystery. I believe that if we go there, we may find clues, answers to what became of the dragons that once lived. Perhaps even more powerful artifacts, or signs of where the few remaining dragons have gone.
Cedric frowned, feeling the weight of the dragon's words.
But why should we find anything there now, after all these years? Surely someone would have found what was left if it was that important.
The city was abandoned by humans, but dragons do not abandon their homes so easily. There are places deep in the mountains where no man has set foot since the war. Veloria is more than just ruins. It is a graveyard of secrets. And some of those secrets may lead us to a greater understanding of the fate of dragons, including my own kind.
The dragon said with a low growl. Cedric nodded, understanding the gravity of the journey ahead.
And you think we will find those answers in the ruins of Veloria?
Vorganax's yellow eyes shone with confidence.
If there are answers, they are there. But we must be careful. Zahira remains a restless land, its borders guarded by those who covet the ancient city's lost power.
Cedric shifted in the saddle, feeling the weight of their task pressing down on him.
Zahira, then. We will avoid main roads and patrols as much as possible. We do not want any unpredictable encounters.
The dragon snorted, its nostrils flaring.
Good. The fewer distractions, the better. We have much to do.
After weeks of traveling through the sun-baked kingdom of Zahira, they had grown accustomed to the endless dunes and howling winds that routinely spun sandstorms across the desert terrain. Cedric had long ago lost sense of time and their location on the map, but periodically caravans they came across showed him the path over Zahira's Great Plains.
Veloria lies beyond the spine of Zahira.
One of the caravan drivers told Cedric, his face weathered by the desert winds.
A place where none dare go. They say the sands there whisper of the dead.
Every night Cedric sat by the fire talking with Vorganax. One night, as the stars stretched endlessly above them, he asked the question that had been swirling in his mind since he had heard of Veloria.
Tell me, Veloria's people once rode dragons, did they not? Is it true? They soared together as one?
He said quietly.
Yes, Cedric.
He replied.
In the days before the wars, there was a time when men and dragons were not just allies, but partners in the truest sense. People rode on our backs, and we carried them through the sky. Together, we flew higher and farther than any of them could have gone alone. Our bond was built on trust and respect, built over years of mutual understanding.
The knight's gaze wandered to the distant horizon, where the sand seemed to meet the sky.
It must have been something to see,
he said quietly.
It was.
Vorganax agreed, his voice full of longing.
But those days are gone. Now the dragons hide and the humans hunt. But perhaps...
He paused.
Perhaps not all is lost.
Cedric smiled faintly, imagining what it would be like to fly with Vorganax soaring above the world like the heroes of old. Finally, after many days of traveling through the desert, the landscape began to change. The flat dunes gave way to jagged cliffs and steep, rocky paths. Ahead of them, in the distance, a tall, ominous mountain loomed. At its summit, the remains of Veloria were barely visible, ancient ruins crumbling under the weight of time. Circling the base of the mountain, they came upon a small entrance, just large enough for a man to pass through. Around it were the remains of an ancient battle. The skeletons of dragons and men lay scattered across the mountainside, half buried in the sand. Rusted swords, shattered shields, and broken armor lay as silent witnesses to the war that had ravaged this place long ago. The sun glinted off the bones of the dead, a harsh reminder of the fate that awaited all who came here.
A grim place.
Cedric muttered, dismounting and examining the remains.
The siege of Veloria.
The dragon replied grimly too.
It was here that the final battle for Zahira was fought. Many died, dragons and men alike. This was once a place of great power, but now there is only death.
The knight nodded solemnly before entering the cave. Together with Vorganax, he descended into the darkness. The cavern extended deeper into the mountain than Cedric had expected. The air was cool and damp, the scent of ancient stone and decay thick in the air. As they walked further, their footsteps echoed off the walls, the darkness closing in around them. After what felt like hours of wandering through narrow passages, they emerged into a vast chamber at the heart of the mountain. The cavern resembled a forgotten fortress, with ruined fortifications built into the stone walls. Scattered throughout were large pens clearly designed to house dragons. Iron bars, now rusted and broken, lay abandoned. The remains of what must have once been a great city for dragons now crumbled to dust. The knight ran a hand along one of the broken walls, marveling at the enormity of the place.
This was their home, wasn't it? Dragons lived here.
He said quietly.
Yes.
Vorganax confirmed, lowering his voice.
This was one of the great dragon's strongholds. The dragons of Zahira called it home long before the war.
Suddenly a distant sound echoed through the hall. It was a low, guttural roar that made the hairs on the back of Cedric's neck stand on end. Instinctively, he reached for his sword.
Did you hear that?
Cedric asked, clutching his weapon tightly.
What was that? Bandits?
The dragon narrowed his eyes, turning sharply toward the source of the noise.
It's a good thing it was a bandit,
he said darkly. Heavy footsteps came from the shadows at the far end of the hall. A deep, rumbling growl filled the cave, followed by a series of blood-curdling roars. The ground shook beneath them as a massive three-headed creature emerged from the darkness, its scales glinting and each head growling in a different tone. A hydra. Cedric's heart pounded in his chest as the hydra's many heads darted toward them, its eyes full of malice. Vorganax flexed his wings with a wry grin.
It would be easier if they were just bandits.
Cedric, despite the fear that gripped him, couldn't help but grin back.
Yeah, but where's the fun in that?
He said, clutching his sword. The battle began as the three-headed hydra charged across the room, its massive form shaking the ground with every step. The beast's eyes glowed with primal fury, its three heads snarling and snapping with murderous intent.
What do we do?
Cedric shouted, sword at the ready, but his pulse quickened as the hydra drew near. The dragon roared, his great wings spreading.
I will attract its attention. You chop off its heads, but be careful. It spits acid.
Cedric nodded determinedly, his grip tightening on the hilt of his blade. He had faced many foes before, but never one like this. The hydra roared, each head moving independently, eyes darting between the dragon and the knight. Vorganax lunged first, a stream of fiery breath escaping from his jaws and lighting the room in a bright orange glow. Flames engulfed the hydra, but to Cedric's horror, the fire seemed to do nothing more than anger the beast. The creature's thick, armored scales were largely unscathed by the flames. Vorganax continued to advance, using his size to close the distance between them. The hydra lunged forward, one of its heads darting toward him. Cedric watched as it sank its teeth into Vorganax's wing. The dragon let out a roar of pain, but immediately responded by sinking its own fangs deep into the hydra's neck. He held on tight, using his weight to pull the head down, but as he did so, the hydra's middle head spat out a vile stream of acid. The acid struck his square in the back, sizzling and burning as it began to eat away at his scales. The dragon winced, his roar turning into a growl of agony. The knight, seeing his friend in pain, knew he had to act. He darted through the flames, using the dragon's distraction to his advantage. As one of the hydra's heads rose to spit again, he swung his sword with all his might. The blade pierced the thick, scaly neck, and the severed head fell to the ground with a thud. Furious, the hydra shrieked, its center head pivoting to confront Cedric. Its teeth sank into his shield as it shot forward at incredible speed. The blow's ferocity sent the knight backward against the cave's stone wall. The breath knocked from his lungs as his shield tore from his hand, and he smashed hard against the wall. Groaning in pain, Cedric struggled to stand. His vision blurred, but through the haze he saw Vorganax continuing the fight. The dragon had managed to bite through the neck of the head he was holding, and now only one remained. The final head thrashed wildly, trying to bite into the dragon's body. But he, with a snarl of pure determination, sank his claws into the hydra's neck and pinned it to the ground. With one last brutal movement, Vorganax snapped his jaws over the final head, his powerful fangs crunching through bone. The hydra's body shuddered, its limbs twitching before it finally collapsed in a lifeless heap, its final head hanging lifeless in his claws. The room was silent, save for the dragon's heavy, labored breathing. Vorganax dropped to the ground, clearly injured, his large frame shaking with the effort. Blood dripped from his wing, which had been shredded by the hydra's teeth, and the area where the acid had hit him continued to hiss and sting. He turned his head to look at Cedric, his voice tired but full of concern.
Cedric, are you okay?
Cedric, bruised and battered, rose slowly to his feet, wincing as he moved. He grunted, limping toward the dragon, his body aching.
Barely.
He groaned, a half-hearted smile on his face.
But I'm alive.
The dragon chuckled weakly, his chest rising and falling slowly.
You look terrible.
The knight grinned despite the pain in his ribs.
And how are you?
Vorganax snorted, trying to hide his discomfort. His wing was bleeding, and the acid burn on his back continued to sizzle, eating away at his scales.
We need water,
the dragon said, his voice strained.
To clean the wounds. Then gather herbs. I will tell you which ones. Make a potion and bandage the wounds.
Cedric nodded despite the fatigue weighing on him.
Okay, I will find water and herbs,
he muttered, forcing his aching legs to move. As Cedric limped through the cave in search of healing herbs, he noticed something unusual. A sealed door, untouched for what seemed like centuries. On it was an ancient dragon symbol, a glowing mark set into the stone. He paused briefly to examine it. Curiosity gnawed at him, but the urgency of Vorganax's condition took him away. After a while, Cedric managed to find water and later gathered herbs. He followed his instructions carefully, grinding the plants into a paste and applying it to the dragon's wounds. He bandaged the wounded wing as best he could, and poured water over the acid-scorched flesh, watching as the hissing gradually died down. By the time the job was done, they were both exhausted. Cedric collapsed on the cave floor, exhausted, his body aching from his bruises and the weight of his armor.
We will need to stay here for a while.
The dragon rumbled, lying down with a heavy sigh.
Until I recover, and you too.
Cedric nodded, staring at the dark ceiling of the cave.
I suppose there are worse places to camp,
he said, a wry smile lacing his voice. The dragon gave a low, tired chuckle.
Indeed.
And so for now they remained in the ancient, battle-scarred cave, licking their wounds and gathering strength for the journey ahead.